Hi, I'm going to go over the must-have steps in a project plan definition from the Horn book. The first must-have is you have to put in your project plan, in the definition of your project plan, the purpose. Now let me start out by saying that we're not looking for a lot of words or a lot of sentences or paragraphs to answer any of these. This is just a project definition. And definitions are usually short, 1 or 2 sentences that quickly get to the point of what you're trying to do. So for the purpose, we want to know, why are you doing your project? And very often in the book it will talk about a business value. In this case, the business is you. You might be in the business of completing a graduate program and are required to do a master's project. So that's one of the purposes. The other purpose you might have is that you're going to get some benefit out of it. There's educational benefit for you doing this project. And what is that benefit? In that sense, what's the problem being solved? And I've talked to some of you about what problem you're trying to solve in your 601 project. And so you would explain that here. And this can be short and brief. We're not talking about getting elaborate at this point at all. The next is the goals and objectives. So you've talked about why you're doing this project. Now for the goals and objectives part of the definition, what are you doing? What's the outcome that you expect? Is it going to be a website? Is it going to be a research paper? Is it going to be some kind of web application or a mobile application? And this can be, once again, does not have to be long. And the key thing is, what are you going to accomplish by doing this? Next is the success criteria. Now this is a lot simpler than it may seem. But when it talks about being measurable and verifiable, is that there's something to look at, something to we can count, see, experience at the end to know you've made a success. So if you're doing a website and you expect there are going to be 30 pages of content, you could say, I'm going to make a website and there will be 30 pages of content at the end. Or I'm going to measure how many people have actually viewed the site. Or I'm going to get 10 usability responses. So basically, how do you want to rate the success? And one important success factor is that your advisor looks at it and approves it. So that's also a success factor as well. Remember, one of the stakeholders is your advisor in this project, if you're doing this for your master's project. The next thing is the project context. And in this case, we want to know how the project is going to relate to other projects within your program. So in this case, product doesn't make sense, but it's how it relates to your experience through the program, or your experience to how you're working. The organization you're working with is you, and you may be working a full-time job. So how is this going to fit in to that kind of work? What does it mean in the context of how you're going to what you're doing at work? Some of you may be doing this project for work. In that case, you should describe how it fits within that organization as a whole. The next item on the list for your project definition are assumptions. And assumptions are the things that are going to exist as you enter doing the project, that you can assume are going to be true as you go forward. One assumption is that you're going to do this over the course of a semester, since it's for your 601 project. One assumption is that if you're doing a website, is that the content is going to be text only and have to be converted. And it's anything you want the stakeholders to know about the project going into it that helps put it in the framework for what's going to happen. The next are constraints, and as it says here, this lists any schedule, budgetary, resources, or other factors that will limit the options available to the project. Schedule-wise, what limits it is that it's, you might be doing it over the 12-week period if you're doing it this summer. Technical factor is that you're going to be using a web host that only provides a certain level of service, so you can only work with this technology. And event-wise, it could be that maybe in the middle of your period you're working on it, you have to go attend an event somewhere, a conference, and you won't be able to work on it for that period of time. And remember, these are constraints that you're aware of before you start the project that you know right now. This may change later. And the risks are to list major risks that you're aware of now that could affect the impact. Your computer may break down. You only have one computer to use. You have to take some training in order to learn a certain software, but the training is canceled at the last minute. You're depending on someone to help you with some of the coding, and that person becomes unavailable. I mean, the risks can be varied. And it applies to your ability to complete the project and everyone else who might be involved with it. The stakeholders in this case is pretty straightforward and not long. I mean, it's yourself, obviously. It's your advisor if you're doing this for a 601 project. It could be, if you're doing this for the context of your work, it's anyone who's involved that has some investment in time, money, interest in what you're doing. And so you'd list them because you're going to have to communicate with them. They need to have some expectation of what's going to happen. And the communication is very important. So you want to develop that stakeholder list. Here are the last 3 items for your project definition. Project dependencies. This is a lot of these items relate to other items. For instance, you talked about in the project context, what is the context that the project's occurring in? Such that in this case we're talking about the context as it might have a dependency on something else happening. And the dependencies can be a person, a thing, a place, a technology, and that's what you would list here. For instance, I mentioned earlier that you may be relying on a programmer to help you with some coding. So your project depends on that programmer doing that. So that would be dependency. And then of course that relates to the risk factors. So all these things interrelate. You could be depending on getting access to an office to do the work in, or access to a studio in order to do some videotaping. You might be depending on doing videotaping outside, and the weather better be good. And once again, that becomes a risk, because if it rains a lot and you can't get outside, your dependence on being outside affects the whole project. And once again, this is just a list. Scope specifications and out-of-scope specifications are probably 2 of the most important things to start to define in the project definition and ultimately in the whole project plan. The scope really defines all the areas, all the things that you're going to work on, and put a boundary around that. In other words, one aspect, if you're doing a website, part of the scope is I'm going to do this is going to be done in HTML. It's going to use images, it's going to use CSS. The out of scope in this case would be that it's not going to be PHP. I'm not going to do programming. It's not going to have audio and video. Now, these kinds of scope specifications are very important when you're working with clients. So they know what you expect to do, and more importantly, what is out of scope. So if the client introduces a new idea, a new request, if it's outside of the scope, not within it, then you could say, that's not within the scope as we specified in the project plan, in the definition, so we have to change the plan or the project to accommodate it. If you don't list these things, then you can get a lot of hot water when the client asks for something and he says, well, I wasn't planning to do that, and the client says, but you never said you weren't going to do that. In this case, the client might just be your project advisor. So you have to be clear with your project advisor what you're expecting to do, and more importantly, what you're not expecting to do in the context of this, so the expectations are reasonable and understood. On the screen is a project definition I wrote for a real project I'm doing. It will be available as a PDF on in a module for this module on project definition. Thank you.